This audio is called Storytelling, the importance of telling our story. I'm going to begin this talk with a quote. These are words from a film called Saving Mr. Banks, and this is the quote. "We restore order with imagination. We instill hope again and again and again. Maybe not in life, but in imagination. This is what we storytellers do." Now, I think these words are very beautifully said because they highlight something very important. I suppose primarily they describe the way in which storytelling generates imagination and carries hope, and is therefore a kind of transformational vehicle. Stories help us to create and sustain both hope and possibility. They introduce the possibility of change and therefore of resolution. We don't get a resolution without changing something. There has to be a shift for something to alter its shape or its pattern. A story, in whatever form it appears in your life, whether it's a fairy tale in a book or a film, or a real life story that you hear about on the news or read in a newspaper, these stories mean something to us. We can identify with these people, these characters, their dilemmas, their difficulties, their successes, their hopes and their dreams. They create an avenue for us to feel, to be in touch with our emotions, and through this we can relate to our own life experiences. The quote also highlights the value in being able to reach a resolution through the telling of a story, our own story. Now, each of us has a kind of internal life story. It's our history, you could say, literally, our memory, the things that we know that have happened to us, that have shaped our lives. However, we also have a kind of internal life script, and this is different to our story. Now, some of this script is known to us because it comes from our life experiences, the things that we know about, our known memory. However, there will also be things that we don't know about that are part of our script, things that we've absorbed from the world around us as we grew up, things we've inherited from the people around us, or even things we've inherited from previous generations. So back to our internal script. Some of this is known to us, but some parts of this script are actually completely unknown to us, and yet we're living through this script. We can be living by certain rules, customs, expectations, things we don't even consciously recognize or know about. As if some part of us is being driven on autopilot. Now, that's great if your life script is good and it's working for you and it's serving you well. But if something has gone wrong in your life along the way, maybe a period of your life developmentally didn't go well, or there was a particular struggle in your history, if you've had any experiences that you couldn't resolve or grow through, or maybe your family or parents or your grandparents or your social group have lived through a particular historical struggle or difficulty, but one that hasn't been emotionally processed and filed away properly, then you may still be living with the impact of this. It may literally be woven into your script. I guess that's what we mean when we talk about emotional baggage. Emotional baggage is actually simply life experience. It's life history. But it's life history that we haven't been able to make sense of, to grow through, and to put down and file away appropriately. Now, my view is that we all have this in some way, shape or form, because we all have a history. The question is, what do we do with it? Can we use our experiences, our life experiences, to evolve, to learn from and to grow? Or are our life experiences holding us back? Are we repeating? Are we living in a way that isn't in our own best interests? Are we stuck? Now, storytelling is a fabulous way of discovering and finding out about our life scripts. Just as we can relate to and identify with a storyline that we hear or see externally, discovering our own story is sometimes one of the most therapeutic journeys that we can make. Sometimes it's one that we need to make. Sometimes we need to call a halt to being engaged in a replay that may not be giving us the kind of quality of life that we want for ourselves right now and in our future. And unearthing our story, our script, allows us to process and integrate experiences from the past, to file them as a past memory, as opposed to reliving them again and again in the present. So resolution of something, of baggage, isn't about getting rid of the past. It's more of a processing and refiling system. It's about being able to develop our ability to use an experience in a way that integrates that experience into our growth and into our own evolutionary development. Discovering and understanding our own story is a vehicle for exactly this, a way of generating change, growth, hope, and possibility. It's also a way of processing any emotions that are still tied into past experiences. I think it's really interesting that in some cultures, the telling of ancestral stories, of actual events, and of tribal history was once a very integral part of social structure, a social event. When ancestral history is laid out before us in the form of a story, we can be involved in it and absorb it, and yet we can also stand back from it at the same time. It gives us a way to connect up and relate to our own story as it unfolds. It creates a known and an acknowledged link between the past and the present. And this enables and stabilizes a kind of known storyline for us. It helps to give reason and meaning to some of our experiences, particularly our emotional experiences. It creates a kind of emotional anchor, especially if we're trying to sort through any kind of emotional turmoil that we're struggling with and trying to make sense of. You may know the saying, you can't see the woods for the trees. Having a history, a family history laid out before you, literally does allow you to see both the woods and the trees. We can be in it and yet stand back from it at the same time. This is a primary function of storytelling in any context. We can be in it, connected to it, engaged with it, and yet separate from it at the same time. And this gives us the possibility to reflect rather than continue to be fully absorbed. It's interesting that in the same way, when families tell stories about their history, their family history, or things that happened to us when we were children, for example, it gives a shape for us to begin to understand and know ourselves through. And it's so valuable when we are able to connect to what we know of family history. I can speak about this in a very personal way. I know when I learned about my mother's history, her story, and the world that she grew up in, so much of my own struggle became apparent to me. So much of what I experienced emotionally, things I had struggled with and couldn't sort of get my head around, began to make sense. So storytelling, both in a personal way and in a social way, understanding family history, understanding social history, allows us to make sense of ourselves, of our emotional experiences, and to take a greater charge of ourselves. Literally, if you've been driving through your life on autopilot, creating this kind of understanding and this kind of reflection can put you in your own driving seat. It creates this possibility. Equally, having stories that enable us to process the emotional experiences of humanity, the difficulties that as human beings we simply do struggle with, are just so helpful. Witnessing everyday emotional turmoil and resolution gives hope. Witnessing intensely challenging and difficult situations that become bearable generate hope. Being able to identify with and yet stand back from at the same time transforms something overwhelming into a shared and therefore bearable experience. In pretty much every culture across the globe, being a storyteller was once a valued profession. I guess at this particular time in history, we might see filmmakers as our modern-day storytellers. For the generation of children who are growing up now, a whole range of different media is available for storytelling. And as the internet continues to grow, children are inundated, literally, from a visual and audio perspective. So the way in which information and storytelling is absorbed is changing. This is actually a whole talk in itself, as I feel there are huge debates to take place around the way in which we absorb information, and indeed the amount of information and the diversity of information that we're inundated with continually. What I do want to really acknowledge in this audio is the value of storytelling in any medium and in any setting, and the importance of the kind of creativity that it generates. Regardless of the medium that you're engaged in, whether it's a book, a newspaper, a live performance of the theatre or an opera, a film, TV or the internet, and indeed whether it's fiction or fact, the telling of historical events, a family story, or a drama or fairy tale, the purpose it serves, its value, is that it gives us a vehicle through which we can process something of our own experience. It provides a vehicle through which we can access our own story, our own information, if you like, and much more importantly, through which we can access and process our own emotional experience. It's actually my opinion that the way in which Western culture has evolved, where the arts and creativity are seen as a kind of separate entity, a kind of luxury, an addition to life, I suppose, rather than a necessity, particularly within our educational system, where massive emphasis is placed on the storage of factual information rather than any kind of reflective thinking. To my mind, this has massively missed a very important developmental and evolutionary purpose. Our capacity to process our emotional experience is key to the way in which we are able to embrace a position of self-responsibility in life. Wisdom is the joining together of knowledge, information and experience, and the capacity to develop a fluid, organic relationship between these, a creative relationship. We could say that if wisdom is the joining together of knowledge, information and experience, then creativity is the process which intertwines them and enables them to take form, the process that enables them to find a shape and in doing so develop meaning. In turn, from an emotional perspective, meaning enables us to feel grounded, to remain stable when all else feels unstable. It's healthy to feel confidently vulnerable. It's healthy to feel at ease with feeling uneasy. When we place an emphasis on the learning of factual information, when we place value and importance on a child's capacity to store facts, rather than to process their actual experiences, we're not teaching them how to develop wisdom. We're not giving them a toolkit to enable them to navigate life in the best possible way. Our emotions are the vehicle through which we gain access to the full experience of our lives. When we listen to a story or watch a story, regardless of whether it's a documentary, a factual recording, or a fictional drama, live or on TV, it's the emotional connection that we establish through the characters and through the situation that we're observing that allow us to process and connect to our own experiences. I'm going to end by repeating the quote that I started with. We restore order with imagination. We instill hope again and again and again, maybe not in life, but in imagination. This is what we storytellers do. Storytelling is a tool. It creates creativity. Storytelling generates imagination. Imagination generates possibility. And possibility generates life. Thank you for listening and take care. This is copyrighted material 2014. Jenny Bell.